Hi, everybody. Welcome to this 30-minute session this morning on how to continuously improve your team. Tim Baker's my name, and I'm going to be working with you in the next 30 minutes. And I just want to give you a few very simple but very powerful techniques that will get the best out of your team, but more importantly, how you can continuously learn. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do here. Most great teams, regardless of whether they're in the world of sport, in the arts, in politics, in business, wherever you like to look, all of them have one thing in common. They're always in a state of continuous improvement. They never rest on their laurels. They believe that they can always be better. And I think in the world of work, the big impediment for us to do this, of course, is time. We're always busy doing the job we need to do. In other words, we're working in the business rather than on the business. So the only time we really try to look at the way we do things often is when things go wrong. And then, of course, we've got to down tools and try and fix it. So really, I want to talk about that today and give you a few tips in this very short, sharp session. So welcome. I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of this presentation. So you'll get a copy of that in your inbox at some stage today. So let me share my screen and we'll launch into the topic. So for those of you who don't know who I am, you can see that I write books. At the end of this year, I've written 17 books. I am a keynote speaker, so I get to present, and I've got my first overseas gig for quite a while now since COVID. So I'm looking forward to that coming up at some stage in the near future. I also run workshops for leaders and executive coach as well, and I still play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane, which is a little tragic, but never mind. So that's a little bit about me. Now, the book that I'm referring to is the book Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. And I've got a special offer for you at the end of this presentation, but I just wanted to share some of the nice things that people said about the book and how they got something out of it. But one of the things I did do is I did look at the world's most successful sporting team. And for some of you, you may not be aware of what that is, but the world's most successful sporting team is the New Zealand All Blacks rugby union team. They actually win 83% of their games, which is phenomenal when you think about it. And whether it's male or female, they're the best, most successful sporting team in the world. And there's a lot to learn from that team. And you can see that there is some nice testimonials from members of the All Blacks, some from the Australian team and Commissioner of Queensland Police, Katarina Carroll. And also a testimonial from Nick Farr-Jones, who's the captain of the Wallabies team here and has some great things to say about the book. So I'd like to think the book is for business and it's for teams, but it does have a sporting flavour to it. And so that's how the book's positioned. It's really an opportunity for you to build a high-performing team. And one of those characteristics, of course, is continuous learning. And I'll get to that in a moment. So let's have a look at where this is positioned. Now, one of the objections, of course, that people have when they're looking at improving their team is, how do I find the time to work on the business rather than in the business? Because we're all very busy. We're all usually short-staffed. We've probably got more to do than we possibly can imagine. So it's a difficult balancing act. And as I said earlier, what happens, of course, is when things go wrong, that's when we down tools and start looking at how we can improve things. I would suggest to you that we should be doing it throughout the work that we do. But the question then is, how do we do it in such an efficient way that we don't interrupt the flow of work that we need to do? That's the key question. And I realize that that's something that people struggle with. And that would be one of the major objections of a topic like this. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So I want to talk about the options that you've got to debrief. And the truth of the matter is, you've got more options to debrief in your day-to-day work than you possibly imagine. So I want to share with you what those 4 options are. Then I want to focus our attention on the after-action review, because I believe the after-action review is not being utilised as effectively as it can be. And I think one of the reasons for that is we've turned it into a quality assurance strategy rather than a genuine attempt to try to improve the way we do things. So I do want to focus attention on that today. And of course, as I said earlier, we've got a special offer for you at the end of the presentation. All right, so where does this fit in? And you can see there from my book, Winning Teams, the model there shows you the 8 characteristics around the outside of the model. And you've got building trust, share leadership, be agile, create purpose, manage stakeholders, improve systems, utilize diversity, and learn continuously. So I'm going to focus in on improving systems today, which is one of the characteristics of high-performing teams. All high-performing teams, as I mentioned, are in a continual state of improvement. How can we do things better, faster, easier, more cost-effectively, safer, with better working relationships? All of these issues are issues that high-performing teams grapple with day to day, moment by moment, project by project, situation by situation. So I really want to focus in on just one, because we've only got a short time together, of course. But if you tune in to my regular webinars every Friday, I cover all of the other areas in some shape or form at different points throughout. So let's look at the first. Well, first of all, that's a great picture, isn't it? That's the New Zealand All Blacks, and they're conducting their traditional haka, which is their dance at the beginning, which in itself is quite intimidating, and you could probably see that. So many teams are intimidated even before the haka, because they know they're up against a sporting team that basically wins 83% of their matches. And then the haka occurs, and if they're not intimidated before, they certainly would be after that. And of course, once they play, they're quite awesome. And there's a very healthy rivalry between Australia and New Zealand with regard to this. And I guess in one sense, if you're an Aussie, you often get sick of losing every year to these wonderful players, the All Blacks. So we'll look at that in more detail. So here are your options. Now, when I say debrief, I'm talking about an opportunity where there's a start and a finish to, say, a project. And you've got an opportunity to, so what you can see up the top, you've got formative and summative. Now, a formative debrief is something that occurs throughout a project. So you don't have to wait to the end, obviously, to do a debrief. Often we have regular work in progress meetings where we get some feedback on how things are working, what's working well, what's not working well. And then the next heading is the summative. Summative, of course, summary being at the end of the project. Now, so the first important thing to recognize is that we can debrief either during or at the end of a project. I'd suggest both are viable options. Now, the other thing is when we debrief something, you can see on the right-hand side, we can do it formally. And by formally, what I'm really referring to there is where we have a formal agenda. We have perhaps a number of people that prepare presentations and talk about the project from a planned point of view. But the other side of it is we've got the informal debrief. That's where we might have a corridor conversation, or we might talk to several people in the team in a spontaneous way about what's working and what's not working. So we do have those two options. And what that basically means is that we've got 4 basic options when we actually debrief. We've got regular dialogue, and regular dialogue is something that is where there are informal discussions going on throughout the project And there should be, of course, always have those formal dialogues, those regular dialogues. Now, the other informal feedback we can have is at the end of the project, so we can actually get the team together and say what's working, what's not working, what could we do differently, and so forth. Now, also you've got the check-in, which is more of a formal type of approach, where we actually have presentations from various people in the meeting. And then at the end of a project, which is the two summative debriefing options, you've got end of project debrief, which can be done formally. Debrief, which can be done informally. That is a verbal presentation, or of course, as many large projects have, of course, is a reporting process where we might have a written report talking about that. So you've got basically 4 options. Now, what I'm suggesting is that you should be exercising all 4 of those options, not just because you're going through the hoops, but because they're wonderful opportunities to improve your systems, both during and at the end of a project. So let's talk about that a bit further. Now, the after action review, which is, it came from the military, and the after action review, a lot of things come from the military. And in fact, the US military were the first to design the after action review. And basically it was done as obviously a debriefing methodology. And what happened is the world of work recognized its potency and decided to take it on board. So lots of organizations now are using after action reviews. It was very slow to take off. And unfortunately, now that it has taken off, as I said earlier, what's happened is a lot of organizations are using it as part of their QA type processes. Now, the problem with that, of course, is it becomes a box ticking exercise. So there's no great substance to it. We're just going through the motions because we have to. It's part of what we do. So I would say it's a lot more than that. And Peter Senge, who is a real guru in the whole area of the learning organization, said this about the after action review. The AAR is arguably one of the most successful organizational learning methods yet devised. Yet every corporate effort to graft this truly innovative practice into its culture has failed. Again and again, people reduce the living practice of the after action review to a sterile technique, which is precisely what I'm talking about when we talk about it from the point of view of a quality assurance, box that needs to be ticked. So it's a lot more effective than that. And really, if I want you to take one thing out of this morning's session, it is the idea that the after action review should be used as a learning opportunity, not just a quality assurance mechanism. So the question that you need to ask, and you can shape the questions for you, for each. So if we're going to talk about improving systems, which is precisely what we're talking about this morning, then these are the 3 questions that you can ask. Now, of course, as I said earlier, you can ask these during a project, or you can ask these at the end of a project. But I think they're worth asking regardless. Now, because we've got hybrid working arrangements all over the world, and this is something that's here to stay, I believe that the after action review will be even more relevant, because in a lot of cases as a leader, you're not sitting there or looking over someone's shoulder. So obviously you've still got to be in touch with what's going on. But because you're not sitting there, you really need people to sort of talk to you about what that is. So what are the 4 questions? What are the 3 questions? The first question that you can ask, and of course you can do this one-on-one, or you can do this with a group. And so if, for example, if you've got a group of people working on a project, of course, the idea would be to get them on Zoom, or if you've got the luxury to have them in the room, then of course you can ask them in the room. And I should also point out, before we go too much further, this process can take 20 minutes and it can be enormously powerful, and I'll talk about why that is. But here are the questions. What systems, processes, and procedures are working well? Now, why would I ask that if something was an absolute disaster? Even if something is an absolute disaster, there is always something that's working well. So by starting with the positive, we're creating an upward spiral of positivity, not a downward spiral of negativity. So let's start with what's working well. Now, for a project that's not working particularly well, that question might be met with muted, with silence, basically. People don't want to say anything, but just persevere, because there are things that are working well and they should be put on the table and we should acknowledge them. Why should we do that? Because we should continue to use that or continue to harness that because it's working effectively for us. So absolutely talk about that. But once you've exhausted that question, you can then ask this question, which is the second question, which is what systems, processes, and procedures are not working well? Now, even if the project is humming along, ticking along, and everything's working beautifully, there is always room for improvement. And I think that's the mindset you want to be in as a leader. And of course, there's always things that can be improved. So this is our opportunity to investigate some of the systems, processes, and procedures that perhaps we need to look at a little more closely. So I'm going to hear back what the team members are going to tell me. And as if I'm doing this one-on-one, I can do this as well. But I want to hear what's not working well. Now, that's not a personal criticism about anyone. And this is important because I think some people think that, this is an opportunity to point the finger of blame. It's not. This is an opportunity to really just objectively look at what's working and what's not working. So set up some ground rules around this. Otherwise, people may be afraid to say anything because they feel that they might be incriminating someone in the process, and it's not about that at all. So hear what people have got to say. And then the next question, which is the key question, is what improvements or changes can we make for the future? So having discussed the first two questions, we're now in a great position to talk about what improvements and changes can be made. And this is, of course, critically important because this is where improvements to systems occur. Now, you might say, well, why can't I just do that in my office? Why do I need to engage my team in that? After all, I'm an expert in my area and I've observed what's going on. I can make those judgments myself. Well, I don't doubt that for a minute. And I don't doubt your judgments are very good. But here is the important point. If you make that decision, then none of your team members have got skin in the game. In other words, none of your team members have had any opportunity to put forward their suggestions, thoughts, and ideas. And therein lies the problem. So by opening it up to your team, you're giving people an opportunity to put things on the table that can be discussed. And of course, some of those things that are mentioned are probably things that are very easy to implement, and there'll be other things that perhaps aren't. So the criteria you might use when you're looking at the suggestions for question 3 would be, is it easy to implement? Is it cost effective? And is it not disruptive? So if it meets those 3 criteria, is it easy to implement? Is it cost effective? And is there minimum disruption? If it passes those tests, then obviously it's quite a relevant thing to implement. Now, the magic of this is, of course, if you implement those changes, let's say in a formative sense during a project, then it's likely that, you've obviously got continuous improvement occurring for the rest of the project. If it's happening in a summative debrief, that is at the end of a project, you've still got an opportunity to implement those things the next time you've got another project on. But the good news is that the people who are in your team will be 100% committed to those changes. Why? Because people don't argue with their own data. People don't argue with their own information. So obviously, if they believe that something needs to be improved and they make a suggestion and it's implemented, you can be assured that people will commit to that because it's their own information, it's their own idea, and that is a far more powerful way to operate. Here are some examples of when you can use an after-action review. So when a new system of procedures or a way of working has been introduced, so we're always in a process of change, aren't we? All of us. And the reality is you want to know how it's working. So why not do this after a new system's been in place for a couple of weeks or even a couple of months? That would be a useful way to start. What about during a very busy period when capacity has been stretched? So you've got people cutting corners, you've got people who perhaps aren't dotting I's and crossing T's. So how about during your team meeting, your regular catch-up, you talk about what's working well, what's not working well, and what can we do to change and improve things. You can also use this during a trial period of a new system. So let's say that you're implementing a new way of doing things in your team. You're not quite sure whether you're going to, stick it out with that system, but you're going to give it a little bit of an opportunity. It's like a pilot program, and you sit down with your team and you review that. So that would be a perfect opportunity to do an AAR. After a major training activity, okay, another opportunity where you could sit down and do an after-action review. What went well in the training, what didn't go well in the training, and what will we do as a result of the training? So, and finally, if you're working in a shift environment where there's a transition between one shift and the next, you can have a stand-up meeting where you can actually have the shift workers from the previous shift and the shift workers for the new shift, get them together in a stand-up meeting. And basically your issue there is to talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and what should the next shift be mindful of, considering the experience of the previous shift. So there's some examples. By all means, there are many, many examples. That's just a simple sort of approach that you can look at and start with, but there's plenty of opportunities to do that. Now, in practice, I've been working. I've had a long association with the police, not that sort of association. I have, one of my clients is a detective in the homicide division. And, I would imagine it would be a tough job, but basically, they have a team of about 4 or 5 detectives. They go around to someone's place, look at the murder scene and, collect evidence and all the things that people would do. But what this senior detective does is that when everybody's outside on the footpath, before everybody goes home, might be early in the early hours of the morning, before everyone goes, she has a stand-up AAR. And she actually asks people, okay, in this investigation, what went well? In this investigation, what didn't go well? And in this investigation, what could we apply the next time we have another investigation that we've got to deal with? And that's a short, sharp meeting, usually takes about 15 minutes. It's done in a stand-up format, as I mentioned, and then everybody goes home to their family. And you might say, well, why doesn't she leave that until Monday? If this is Friday, why wouldn't she leave it till Monday? Well, by that stage, people, got distracted with other things. Why not do it right in the moment at the time? And of course, because everyone's eager to get home, they're getting straight to the point. So that's a really good example. I also have clients who are working in IT startup firms. And in IT startup firms, there are very few systems, processes, and procedures, at least in the early stages. And there's a good reason for that, because basically it's a new business and, we've just got to get going and we're doing a bit of fly by the seat of our pants. So what this IT startup firm does is, after a project's completed for a client, the leader will ask the team what went well, what didn't go well, and what will we do differently as a result of that. So it can be very useful in that environment as well. Takes, again, 15 to 20 minutes, can make a big difference. I had the opportunity of working with a council, and in this environment, they had a major works program in their own region. And the major works program lasted for about 18 months. So they actually got the stakeholders together and did a debrief and applied the after action review methodology to talk about what went well in the project, what didn't go well, and what could have been done better, or, you know, so for the future, for future reference. So that was a summative debrief that was done at the end of a major project in the region that was impacting, you know, lots of the citizens of the community. It was impacting lots of businesses. It was impacting lots of people within the council. So in order to learn the lessons, they decided to do an after-action review, which makes a lot of sense. I'm sure you'd agree. So there's 3 examples that you might like to consider. So what we're going to do next week is we're going to continue this theme. So I'd like to invite you next Friday, that's the 10th of June, and these presentations always occur at the same time. So at 10 a.m, we're going to talk about improving team systems and creating a continuous improvement culture. So you're welcome to attend. All you've got to do, as you can see, the link is on your page. You just click on that link and do exactly what you did to get in for today's webinar, and you're most welcome. So finally, as I said, there's a special offer, and I wanted to offer you the opportunity of purchasing my book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. Normally the book is $40 plus postage, but if you'd like to send me an email by the close of business today, I will offer you that book for $25 plus postage, and I will sign it for you and send it out to you. So please let me know, and I will certainly be happy to send you a copy of that book. And of course, what I've shared with you today is only one of many, many, many processes that we talk about in terms of building a high-performing team. So thanks, everyone. I've enjoyed working with you today. I hope you found something useful out of that. I probably imagine that you know what an after-action review looks like, and I don't doubt that some of you are using it, but what I hope I've done is given you a new take on that, and perhaps given you a little bit more energy to try the after-action review in a different format, because it's a very powerful technique if it's done well. And remember, it doesn't take very long to do, and that's the key thing, but it's highly effective in terms of what it can achieve. So thanks, everyone. I look forward to catching up with you next week, and have a wonderful weekend, and we'll catch up with each other again on Friday. Thanks, everyone. All the best and goodbye.